conference, even if I have to say it myself. And we've been supported in this venture by Ford Foundation and our traditional partner, the International Monetary Fund. So I hope you really enjoy the conference. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the intellectual stimulus over the course of the next 2 days. Thank you all very much for coming, and may I request Dr. Ishar Ahluwalia now to please give the opening remarks as well as conduct the opening session. And may I request our chief guest, Shri Amitabh Kant, and our special guest, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, to please come on the dais. Thank you all very much.
Shri Amitabh Kant, Shri Sanjeev Sanyal, Dr. Rajat Kathuria, distinguished guests and friends, a very good morning to all of you, and welcome to the 10th G20 conference that ICRIER is hosting. The G20 has become a leading forum of the world's major economies for addressing the most pressing economic challenges facing the world today. It is well known that G20 did an excellent job in handling the crisis of 2008. And over the years, this forum has widened its agenda to cover other subjects relevant for ensuring that the growing interdependence of the different economies of the world is well managed to the benefit of all countries. We at ICRIER have been organizing annual international conferences to address the issues facing the G20 forum, and typically these conferences are held just a little before the G20 summit. It provides an opportunity for policymakers, academics, and other stakeholders to brainstorm and gain an understanding and appreciation of the different points of view on how our common problems can be resolved for the benefit of all. Let me digress a bit to say a few words about ICRIER. We are a mainstream think tank in India with a difference. We started in the early 80s focusing on research on issues arising from India's opening and integrating with the world economy. India has come a long way, opening its economy to trade, technology, and finance, and has emerged as one of the fastest growing economies in the world today. At ICRIER, our thrust areas of research included trade, global competitiveness of Indian industry, macroeconomic stability, and regional economic cooperation. We have diversified our research agenda to keep up with the changing times, covering issues in which G20 is also very interested. Today, our research tries to address the questions on how Indian agriculture can be made globally competitive, yet ensuring food and nutrition security. We study the issues arising from the challenges of urbanization and climate change, sustainable development, and inclusion. Our work on jobs, skills, and human development digs deep into the objective of inclusive growth, highlighting in the process the link between growth and the multiple dimensions of poverty. This year, Argentina is holding the G20 presidency, and the priorities identified are issues of infrastructure for development, sustainable food future, and future of work, among others. These are indeed very important. However, I must mention that there is an elephant in the room, and we must recognize its presence. That is the threat to world trade from a weakening of support for multilateralism and increasing resort to unilateral action. Growing protectionism is posing a big challenge for all the major economies in the world today, including India. The data from the Global Trade Alerts database shows that between 2004 and 2008, global trade to GDP ratio rose 6.6 percentage points to reach a peak of 60.8% in 2008. The slowdown in global growth and the rising spate of protectionist interventions in recent years have brought down that ratio to 56.4% in 2016. India has obviously been affected. Data from the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy shows that Indian firms had witnessed a significant rise in export earnings in the years leading up to 2008, and there has been a steep decline in these earnings since 2008. Only yesterday at Bali, the IMF warned that global growth and stock markets may be significantly harmed with further escalation of trade tension, which is a result, as they put it, of the uneven global economic recovery that has fueled inward-looking policies and contributed to increased policy uncertainty. As Christine Lagarde of the IMF put it in her remarks at Bali, and I quote, "We need to work together to de-escalate and resolve the current trade disputes." The OECD General Secretary, Angel Gurria, added that, again I quote, "This year, the growth does not look so good. What is different is the trade, the tensions, protectionism, the tit for tat, the retaliations." Unquote. The protectionist sentiment is high across the board, and the tariff escalations between the US and China show little sign of abating. I have mentioned earlier the weakening of commitment to multilateral trade negotiations. Things are even worse because even the plurilateral trade agreements have been renegotiated. The collapse of the Doha Development Round in November 2015 exemplifies this. The G20 summit is the right forum to address these challenges. The world around us has changed dramatically in the past year. Admittedly, the issues we face are politically sensitive, and it is perhaps too late to change the priorities set quite some time ago by the Argentine presidency. However, substantial progress cannot be achieved if the multilateral trade rules break down. Our conference should help provide inputs for the summit and, more importantly, suggest the way forward for the Japan presidency, which now takes over for 2019. I'm looking forward to the deliberations at this conference, and what better way to begin than to hear Mr. Amitabh Kant, who will give us the Government of India's perspective on how we should be addressing these issues in the G20 forums. Thank you.
Mrs. Ahluwalia, my distinguished colleague Sanjeev Sanyal, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here. G20 is critical because it accounts for almost two-thirds of the world's population, almost 85% of the global GDP, and close to about 75% of the global trade. And I think it also houses more than 50% of the world's poor. Today's meeting is in the midst of we are at a point of time when a huge amount of global disruption is taking place. And this is, to my mind, taking place on account of very vast number of technological changes across the world. A couple of years back, it was traditionally thought that this Chinese ancient game called Go, it was impossible, and it has millions of moves. And it was thought that it would never, ever be possible for a computer to beat a human being. And the world's champion, Lee Sedol, it was felt was one of the finest player of this game. And out of millions and millions of moves, the computer beat him in 5 different games, one after another, one after another. And it was clearly realized that the last bastion of human thinking and human minds has been totally breached by machines. And therefore, to my mind, we are now in the midst of some of the biggest technological changes that will take place across the world. And it's very important to be prepared for these changes. And these will be ushered in by several technological changes, and G20 has to take the lead to handle some of these changes. If you look across the world, traditional manufacturing and service industries, they are being disrupted in a manner in which we've never seen before. The first industrial revolution was triggered by the invention of the steam engine. That led to the mechanical production. The second industrial revolution was catalyzed by electricity and the assembly line. It made mass production possible. The third industrial revolution brought in computers, digital technology, and the internet. But today, what we are witnessing in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution is a vast number of changes. And they're being driven by autonomous robots, simulation, big data, analytics, augmented reality, cloud, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence. And these technologies are impacting the entire production chain, from design to productivity, quality to production, and they are going to impact human lives in a manner in which we had never seen before. And to my mind, it's important that the G20 countries prepare themselves for a range of disruptions that will take place. And there is increasingly a widespread concern over the potential impact of these technologies on employment. And a vast range of jobs across countries are at the risk of extinction. They are at the risk of huge accumulation of job losses. And the other fear is that technologies would lead to increase in inequalities and there would be lack of social cohesion. One of the biggest innovators of our time, Elon Musk, has stated that artificial intelligence actually represents an essential threat to humanity. And he has suggested very tight regulations. And Bill Gates has said that robots need to be taxed to compensate for greater efficiency compared to humans, and suggested that the pace for automation should actually be slowed down. A recent McKinsey report has estimated that 400 to 800 million people around the globe would be displaced by automation, and we'll need to find new jobs by 2030, for which the world will need to find completely new skills. And there will be a huge need for reskilling and training. And I think it's important for us across the world, and particularly for the G20 countries, to see what kind of radical changes are required to meet the onslaught of this huge disruption that will take place. There's a recent PwC report which says that artificial intelligence will actually contribute as much as 15.7 trillion to the global economy by 2030. 15.7 trillion. And, given India's, if you look at just one country like India, it has the potential to add 957 billion to India's economy, lifting it by almost 15%. And therefore, if you talk about 15.7 trillion, that's combined more than the combined GDP of China and India put together. So what does the world need to do? What do the G20s need to do to embrace technology, create new jobs, and meet the requirements of this completely changed scenario in the midst of this vast disruption that will take place across the world? To my mind, I think we closely need to look at as to how the world needs to realign its education system to emphasize skills rather than mere degrees. I think it's important for many countries to move away from the Anglo-Saxon system of education, where we've had only emphasis on academic degrees, towards very hands-on learning in practical subjects. And I think I would like to give the example of what we are trying to do in India. We in Niti Aayog have started this Atal Innovation Mission, and we're bringing out one of the biggest disruptions in the education system. We've started close to 3,000 tinkering labs in school, where children from class 6 onwards actually work with robots, 3D printers, Internet of Things, from class 6 onwards. And it's really amazing to see the kind of unique innovations that they're all doing for the world of tomorrow. And they're finding solutions to many of the problems of India, day-to-day problems of India, on how to converge garbage into energy, how to find solutions to the problems of agriculture based on soil and weather condition on a real-time basis, or how to find solution of health and so on. And to my mind, it's important that the world actively looks at making a huge difference and moving away, making a radical realignment of the world's education policy. I think secondly, there's a need to, world over, across the world, there's a need to upgrade skills. And there is severe shortage of skilled manpower. And the world needs massive upgradation programs in new technologies. And to my mind, our own IITs and our triple IITs are totally frozen in time. And across the world, there's a need to redefine technology, redefine skills, and drive cutting-edge technologies for the fourth industrial revolution. To my mind, the third key challenge for the world, and G20 in particular, would be how does the world create a very highly flexible, resilient, and a very adaptive workforce? which is extremely multi-skilled and has the capacity to undertake digital tasks from anywhere rather than a fixed location. And this will become increasingly, as digitization takes place and as digitization is driven aggressively, and it's particularly true of countries where government is driving digitization. I would, unlike America where data is owned by Google and Facebook, and unlike China where data is owned by Alibaba and Tencent, in several countries, particularly in India, most of the data sets are owned by government. And here you have, unified payment interface, you have GST, you'll have massive data on the new health insurance and the 150,000 primary health centers which will get linked up to the district hospitals. And you have the Aadhaar system, so you'll have massive data sets. Now, it's important to put out some of these data out in public domain to enable good research and good innovation by startups to take place. And I think there's a big challenge for the world to think of. I mean, there's a big drive towards localization of data. There's a big focus on everybody's trying to protect data. But innovation would require a lot of data to be put out in public domain, and this will be a very key challenge. The world of tomorrow will be a world of data. And I think the challenge before G20 is to find the right balance, the right mix between innovation and data. How do we drive innovation? And without data, no innovation will take place. And therefore, this will be one of the biggest challenges before the world. I think, to my mind, fourthly, the world must ensure, it's important that the world of tomorrow must be a world where we are able to are fully prepared and are able to embrace this new era of artificial intelligence, blockchain, because it's a very radical shift from the world of the past. I mean, if you're not prepared for this world of artificial intelligence, blockchain, additive manufacturing, and emerging technologies, you'll be totally bypassed. And this revolution will require a completely new change of mindset. And it's important that policies must drive this change towards new technologies. And I think, fifthly, to my mind, for the G20s to take the lead to be able to put countries in a position where they are able to work across disciplines and across institutional boundaries, and to break the geographical boundaries of countries, because we must be able to break silos. And a great example of that is medical data, because life-saving opportunities can be utilized by sharing data across different health providers. There's a huge opportunity for research. There's a huge opportunity for providing solutions for the world simply based on experiences of different countries based on data. And to my mind, the sixth and the seventh point I want to make is, sixthly, that the whole focus has to be on social sector. My view is that the world of tomorrow will be driven by education, by health, by nutrition. And these are areas where new technologies would be required to enable us to improve the quality of life and enhance our human development index. Because the world, Silicon Valley and America and Europe has always innovated. They've always innovated. But they've innovated for defense weapons. They've innovated for driverless cars. But these are not the innovations which the world requires. The world requires innovation on how do we enhance agricultural productivity? How do we ensure better medical care for our citizens? Or how do we convert our garbage into energy? And all these are challenges of the world. And therefore, if we are able to find solutions to these problems, we are actually finding solutions for the 7 billion people of the world who will be moving from poverty to middle class in the next decade or so. And to my mind, this is about great innovation emerging from countries where there will be demand and from where you can penetrate global markets. And the seventh point I want to make is to touch on what Mrs. Ahluwalia had talked about, that actually free trade has lifted vast segments of population above poverty line. In the last several decades, it's lifted huge populations across the world. No country in the world has grown and prospered without free trade. If you look at Japan, if you look at Korea, if you look at China, they've all grown on the back of free trade. And therefore, I'm a great believer that poverty can be eliminated through trade and through innovation. And the greater the protectionism, the greater the damage that vast segments of people will remain below poverty line. And therefore, there's a need for G20 to push the boundaries and the limits of protectionism and open up the world for greater trade. And without that, there will be no prosperity. And therefore, my belief is that G20's focus has to be on innovation. It has to be on emerging areas of growth. It has to be on social sectors of health, education, and nutrition. And G20's has to be on focus on breaking the boundaries of protectionism. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Amitabh. May I now request Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal, the Principal Economic Advisor, Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance. Come there, Sanjeev,
Okay.
so everybody can see you.
All right.
I know, because sometimes